Welcome everyone, it's Magnus here with another video, this time talking about the R5 and R6. Specifically R6 is what inspired this, but why I'm not particularly excited. Now if you're new to my channel, I talk about cameras and tech and basically wanting you guys to be part of MVP, Magnus Video Production. So if you want, join me and hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to hit that notification button as well to keep up to date on all my videos. So anyway, let's get started. Now first thing I want to talk about, and the subject of this video, is the R6, Canon R6. Now Canon for many years has been the camera company that has basically, at least for the last 4 or 5 years, basically a Canon company that has disappointed, a Canon company that has disappointed. And it's been that way specifically because their marquee cameras released in 2016, such as the 1DX Mark III and the 5D Mark IV, in a sense set the standard for cameras that were unfortunately under-delivering. You had the 1DX Mark II, not the 1DX Mark III, released in 2016, and that camera had 120 frames per second 1080p, but the 4K in it was slightly cropped and it used an archaic codec. It was motion JPEG, which was unbelievably hard to record to. It didn't have a good compression ratio, and unfortunately it was just lackluster. Then the 5D Mark IV was released, and that camera was also disappointing because it had an even larger crop in 4K, 1.74 times crop, and it used that motion JPEG, which its data rate was 500 megabits per second, meaning that most SD cards, which it has an SD card reader, could not record in 4K, and it had that huge crop anyway. So you had to use CF cards or really fast SD cards. I myself prefer SD cards because they were much cheaper to purchase and you can get larger cards. But even then it hampered it because it didn't use UHS-2 cards, it used UHS-1 SD cards. And what that means is like UHS-2 gives you a little bit more metal plates in the actual card. So I'll pull, for example, this is a UHS-1 card, and this card, let me take my face out of it. Okay, not focusing on me, but all right, anyway, this card, I tried, has one set of like contact points. UHS-2 cards has a couple of rows of contact points, and those rows make it a little bit faster. But 5D Mark IV, although it could read those cards, it couldn't take full advantage of those speeds because the slot was a UHS-1 card slot. So that in itself is a bit disappointing. Hello from the Christmas room. Nice to see you. Going on. So that was a bit disappointing, the fact that Canon released those cameras. But then the subsequent cameras that came out after that, after the 5D Mark IV, such as like the 6D Mark II, didn't include 4K recording at all. And autofocus was stellar, but didn't include 4K. In fact, one of the first cameras that included 4K after a lot of just 1080p cameras was the M50, the mirrorless camera from Canon, the cropped APS-C mirrorless camera. Really small, excellent camera. But that 4K was hampered with the fact that it was heavily cropped and did not use the dual pixel autofocus. It used contrast detect autofocus, which was a bit disappointing because you wanted that camera to offer everything in a small package. But it's an affordable, cheaper camera, and it's still great. Don't get me wrong, it's still great. But it was kind of like you were starting to get used to Canon crippling their camera system. So we almost got used to that with every Canon camera release. I mean, they entered the full-frame mirrorless market, and they gave us an EOS R. And when they gave us an EOS R, they disappointed in the fact that it was seemingly, though from a dynamic range perspective, I have seen samples of the EOS R, outperforming ever so slightly the 5D Mark IV and ISO performance as well, because of the improved processor that they put in it. But it was very similar sensor to that of the 5D Mark IV, which in itself, hang on a second, I'm just kind of messing around with my computer screen here so that you can see actually what I'm showing you next to me, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the 5D Mark IV in itself was a bit disappointing. I mean, 5D Mark IV. EOS R was a bit disappointing in the fact that it just seemed like the same camera. And then you had the RP, which everyone assumed, okay, this is relatively a 6D Mark II. And it is. It's similar megapixel performance. I apologize if you can hear what's going on outside. I live right next to a police station, so I've got cars. I mean, no one should be outside right now. We should all be washing our hands and staying inside. But unfortunately, people are out there, and I guess the cops are going to get them. So that's what's going on there. But I left the window open because I've got lights in here, and it's super hot. It actually was pretty warm today in here near New York City. So EOS RP, disappointed because, again, it seemed like a repeat of the 6D Mark II, which that lacked dynamic range performance, and I don't think the EOS RP helped in that regard either. But then also when that camera came out, it also came out with the fact that it had no 24 frames per second in 1080p. It did have 24 frames per second in 4K, but not 1080p. Since then, Canon has realized that that shouldn't have happened, and they've updated the firmware and put 24p in 1080p, which, of course, that means, okay, that camera is usable, and it's a pretty nice, affordable, full-frame camera with good vlogging options, flip screen and everything. So it's a good camera now, but it's kind of like they're way behind the competition when it comes to at least video specs. Photography specs, it's not bad, but the competition such as Sony was really doing an excellent job with their A9 when that came out. A9 Mark II was a little bit better, but from what I hear, it wasn't too much better. And Nikon did a pretty excellent job, at least with improving their autofocus and focusing on video features, but also their Nikon cameras are pretty well, except for the fact that their Z6 and Z7 only had one card slot, which was like, what are you doing? So, but why not? They're just getting into the game and just getting started. So with all these camera releases that Canon has done over the years, and they're not quick, they actually took time to release cameras. All of a sudden, and everyone's bragged about this, at least online on YouTube, is Canon's year is 2020. Now, aside from the fact that we're going through a current difficult situation with this global pandemic that we've got, it was gearing up to be an exciting year for Canon. You had the Olympics coming up, which have been delayed till next year, but you also had an insane amount of speculation, news, leaks, and then confirmations from Canon that there's a new mirrorless camera coming out that's going to take the camera industry by storm, and that's the EOS R5. And the EOS R5 has specs like a rumored, but still not yet confirmed, 45 megapixel full frame sensor. You've got the ability to do, I believe it was 20 frames per second still pictures. I don't know if that was with electronic or mechanical shutter, but still very fast. And then 8K video. 8K video, like, they not only leapfrogged the competition, they pretty much laughed at the competition and just zipped right past them. And that was hard to believe for most until Canon Australia was like, we're tired of everyone not believing us. This is an actual camera that's coming out. Boom, here you go. You're getting 8K. You're getting full frame 8K, no crop. You're getting 30 frames per second in 8K. There you go. You're getting 120 frames per second, 1080p. But of course, there's been that rumored 4K at 120 frames per second, which I don't think has been confirmed. But then off to the side, kind of walking with its bigger brother, you have the Canon EOS R6, the 6D replacement for the mirrorless, the mirrorless world in Canon. And that one's been rumored to have pretty much more than basic specs. I mean, you're calling this a 6D equivalent, but you're giving it dual pixel autofocus, 4K 60p, 1080p at 120 frames per second. You've got, I believe, 12 frames per second mechanical shutter and up to 20 frames per second electronic shutter speed from taking pictures, and a 20 megapixel sensor. Well, that damn near competes with the 1DX Mark III, and you're calling this a 6D replacement or 6D Mark II replacement? That it seems a little bit hard to believe. Now I saw this video earlier today with from Tony Northrup, and he was talking about what he believes where the R6 will fall in the Canon lineup and what type of specs it might have and when it'll launch and whatnot. But it's a lot of excitement. It's a lot of excitement that he has. And if you scroll down, a lot speak of the R5, but it's just all this excitement that we're hearing. No spec sheet announced by Canon. And I believe that everything that has been announced, or at least most of the things that have been leaked, are probably true. But there's so much that is still yet to be confirmed. And so much, I mean, you're leaking all the good stuff. But then, of course, you put that up front, hiding behind limitations that we don't know that we're going to have yet. For example, 8K video. We don't know the codec. I would assume, I did a video previously, I would assume that it's H.265, which I learned when I was testing the 1DX Mark III, that uses the H.265 codec for its 4K recording, which I thought was interesting when they didn't have to do that, but it actually improves the quality of the footage. I thought the video footage of the 1DX Mark III was phenomenal, not counting RAW, because I did not know and realize that when I had that camera, the raw footage can only work on Final Cut Pro. Apparently, it doesn't work with Adobe software, which is what I use. Nor does it work with DaVinci Resolve, which I use on occasion as well. But we don't know what the R6 and the R5 are going to have from a codec perspective. One would assume they're going to stay safe and use a codec that everyone can use. But to have 8K recording, you're really going to have a high megabit rate for that 8K. Even if it's H.265, which has an excellent compression ratio. But the files in 4K were over 400 megabits per second on the 1DX Mark III when I tested it out. 8K would at least be double that, so 800 megabits per second, which would be around 120 megabytes per second. Don't confuse the two. Megabits and megabytes are different. If you want to know what the megabytes per second is, you take whatever megabits per second you have as like a transfer rate, and then you divide by 8. And then when you divide by 8, you'll get the megabytes per second. So remember that. Total difference. But it's funny because, like, you have those unconfirmed specs of the video itself. They mentioned that they do 30 frames per second 8K, but they did no mention of 24 frames per second. If it doesn't do 24 frames per second, which would be silly because if it could do 30, it should be able to do 24. It makes you wonder, what is Canon thinking? Now, you would think that they learned. That's why they updated the firmware of the EOS RP. But then when the 1DX Mark III came out, and I had it in my hands, I'll show you, at least on my channel if you haven't seen before, my previous tests of the 1DX Mark III, right here. There it is. So I had the 1DX Mark III, and I used it. And unfortunately, it does not have 24 frames per second in 1080p. And you'd swear they learned. Like, 1DX Mark III was almost the perfect camera. A little too heavy, no flip screen, but it didn't have 1080p at 24 frames per second. Now, I can get 24 frames per second 1080p off of my original 6D, which I was holding a moment ago. But it's funny that they're just kind of like gearing towards more. If you want 24p, 24p did exist in the 4K on the 1DX Mark III. Maybe they would lean towards your higher resolution rates to use 24p, because I think maybe they want the higher end video to be used in their cameras, so that you can get used to that rather than sticking to 1080p. But some people want to have smaller file sizes, which I could understand, and especially when you're watching YouTube videos, which you might be watching me. You're definitely watching me in 1080p now, because I've set the 5D Mark IV to 60 frames per second in 1080p, which is pretty cool. So all in all, I just think that these cameras are too good to be true, and we're going to get that Canon Cripple Hammer to eventually show up and then be like, take you out. If you don't know where Canon Cripple Hammer comes from, definitely watch Camera Conspiracies. He's a cool guy, and he's got the funniest videos. But anyway, what you're seeing right next to me too is my experience shooting with the 1DX Mark III on the New York side with no one on the streets, which was pretty interesting. So that's my thoughts on that. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, as far as if you really believe that these are going to be the perfect cameras, the EOS R5 and the R6. Or what do you think, if anything, will the Canon Cripple Hammer come in and take it down? Also, as an update, I did have, and this is, of course, to conclude the episode, I won't spend too much more time. I did have a couple of repairs on two cameras, the 5D Mark IV and the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. Now, I'm using the 5D Mark IV right now, so I can't show you what it looks like, but I had two things wrong with the 5D Mark IV. First, and I'll use the 6D as an example, I had broken the mic input about over a year ago, and I sent it to Canon to fix it, and they did, allegedly, or I thought that they did. But when I tested it like much later, because I thought it was working, the audio just didn't sound right, and I use a different microphone like the one I'm using now to record most of my audio, and then I sync it in post, so I didn't really care. But I noticed that in my vlogs, my audio still sounded weird. Well, then I realized that they never fixed the port at all, but it was past the 6-month warranty. So believe it or not, I had to pay Canon again to fix the port that they never truly finished fixing in the first place. The second thing that happened is my 24-70 f2.8 USM2 lens was broken. I had dropped it way too many times, and I broke it. And I took it to Canon, and it was after I made my live stream video on where it was broken. Took it to Canon one morning, let's say 9 a.m. By 1 p.m. that same day, which was about a month ago at this point, a little over a month ago, they called me, said camera's fixed. And they only charged me relatively the price of what it would have been for my lens alone, even though they charged me for both. They gave me a serious discount. So thank you, Canon. You treated me fair, even though, like, you know, I should have taken that microphone or complained about it much earlier. You still followed policy, but you actually gave me a break, which I appreciate it. Canon's professional services is amazing, so definitely recommend it if you can, if you're a professional shooter. So then there's another story about the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. Now, this camera I've recently repaired. I had a horrible accident with it, and I talked about it in the live stream, where I had it on a tripod, and I'm making sure you can see it. But you see this little cord right here. It fell on the tripod on that cord, which is connected to an SSD, which is what I love about this camera, that you can record directly to an SSD, which saves so much money and time, because you can edit right away off of the SSD. So fell on it, but it could still record to SD card. So I didn't get it repaired right away. But then that port that kind of was lost inside the camera actually hit one of the contacts in the inside the camera. So when I turned it on and activated, since they were touching, completely fried the board. So my Blackmagic was dead. So send it to Blackmagic in late February. Now, as you know, there were still concerns about the virus going on, so I knew my timing must have been horrible. And unfortunately, I sent it to them, and when they got it, I never received any confirmation from them that they actually received my camera. The only way I knew they received it, which I called about a week later, was because I had the tracking. I made sure to send it like 2-day shipping because I wanted to make sure that it was taken care of. So they got it. I received no confirmation that they received it. And then I called them about a week later, and they said, yeah, the service team hasn't looked at it. We're really busy. Called them a week after that, and they were like, they'll look at it tomorrow. I can see that it's next in line. So it took let's just say it took a long time to actually get the camera back. I got the camera back probably about a week ago. So almost a month. And the last time I called them, they, again, very nice. Their team was very nice and at least knew where my camera was and that it would be serviced. And they contacted me right when they had the service. They had the camera in front of them to repair it. And they told me what was wrong. And I said, yeah, go ahead, repair it. And then they sent it back to me pretty quickly. It just took a long time. And unfortunately, they told me over the phone that they wish that they're very backed up, first of all, but they don't have any system that actually updates, everyone requesting their cameras be serviced. So that's unfortunate. And then when they finally send it to me, before they send it to me, they let me know, the virus is going on and we're working on a limited staff. So please know that I also was very thankful. I was just glad to get the camera back. And I knew I had to be patient, especially in these trying times. So thank you to Blackmagic for, in these trying times, still being there, still sticking it out, and actually working on the camera and sending it back to me. I just wish you had a way to update me over what's going on, which you guys mentioned to me too. You wish you had a way to notify automatically status updates of the camera. So that would be great if you implement it. But as far as like your work crew and everyone who I spoke to on the services side, you guys were amazing. So I wanted to thank you for that as well. But very different. Canon, I got it back in one day, thankfully, because their service center is actually drivable for me. So I can get there in 20 minutes. But Blackmagic, I had to send to California. So I completely understand on why that took as long as it did. So let me know if you guys have any stories on getting your camera serviced. But sorry for the noise outside. Again, I have the window open. It's super hot in here. But those are my stories. Let me know if you guys got any service stories of your own that are similar or different, or what you'd recommend I do differently besides taking care of my cameras. I'm actually thankful that I put a cage on it because it actually helped a lot when it came to that. So I talked a lot. I'm done. Thank you. Subscribe if you'd like to see more of these camera videos. And as always, like, share, and you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. It's been a long day. Stay clean. Stay healthy. I appreciate you guys joining me, and I'll see you next time.